Good evening, everybody. Who is the Pyro from Team Fortress 2? It turns out a lot of people see it quite differently. There's been some arguing going on in the community lately about how Pyro has or hasn't changed since his debut, and as someone who cares a lot about anything to do with TF2, I want to be the one to set the record straight. In this video, I want to outline really clearly who was the Pyro on launch, how has he changed, and why does it matter? Starting off with the simple question, who was the Pyro inspired by? Well, the Pyro from Team Fortress Classic, of course. This cool gas mask dude in camo was, even back then, the only character among his roster with a totally obscured identity, although he appears more tactical and counter-strikey than the Pyro we know today. The earliest TF2 Pyro concept art from the Invasion era looks a lot like the TFC version, but rather than looking tactical, he has what I'd call this sort of insect look. A bit like the Enclave from Fallout 2, I think this creepy bug look his mask has is meant to make this cruel character look even more inhuman. In the final concept, we see this insect look alive and well, and in fact the character's creepy, beady, bug-like eyes are made even bigger. There's also this alternative welding mask design in the corner that nobody ever seems to talk about. I always found that pretty fascinating. One detail that didn't make it to the final game but is still present in all kinds of official art for the Pyro is these small, subtle, ominous markings streaking down his mask. It sort of resembles tears running down Pyro's face, or maybe scars. Either way, they definitely accentuate his creepy, cold, empty gaze in a cool way, and I'm a bit sad they were canned. In the final game, Pyro's voice is made entirely muffled, and just like in TFC, he's the only character who we don't even see the skin tone of, let alone a face. He's clearly meant to be a total enigma and a terror. He uses an axe, a slasher movie favorite, as his melee. And for his primary, he of course kills in arguably the most brutal way of any of the mercs, using a homemade flamethrower, a type of weapon known for its use in some of history's worst atrocities. Burning alive is a really terrible way to go out. Admittedly though, there are cracks in Pyro's spooky, imposing persona even on launch. His taunts are a bit goofy, featuring him making Street Fighter references and miming the guitar on his axe, and there's even a pink purse next to his suit in the spawn room locker, which I always chalked up to some kind of visual gag from an asset artist. Regardless, the Pyro still takes the unmistakable role of an ambush class. He's meant to sneak up on you and scare the bejesus out of you. The trailer shows him lighting up a dark room with his flames to reveal a skull logo behind him. The horror flair to his character was hard to miss. And in case they hadn't laid it on thick enough, the TF2 trading cards that came out a few months after the game's release featured an unsettling biography for the Pyro that's still present on the TeamFortress.com site to this day. Only two things are known for sure about the mysterious Pyro. He sets things on fire, and he doesn't speak. In fact, only the part about setting things on fire is undisputed. Some believe his occasional rasping wheeze may be an attempt to communicate through a mouth obstructed by a filter, and attached to lungs ravaged by a constant exposure to his asbestos-lined suit. Either way, he's a fearsome, inscrutable, on-fire Frankenstein of a man, if he even is a man. So, how did Pyro's horror character first change? Well, it wasn't the weapons. The early unlocks generally kept Pyro's homemade horror vibe alive. The Extinguisher and Backburner still feel like the creations of a madman slasher villain. But Pyro did wind up getting possibly the worst cosmetic lineup in the entire game, and I think this is a really big part of the equation. Even Pyro's first cosmetic is a betrayal of his identity in a way none of the other mercenaries' first hats were. Sure, Heavy's football helmet is American and not Russian, but it at least ties into his size and feels like something that could be worn for protection on a battlefield. Meanwhile, Pyro, who, as I've demonstrated, was meant to be a scary and imposing psycho, was given this totally ridiculous helicopter hat that you'd only expect to see on a snot-nosed toddler. And I get that it might have been meant as a gag to put the killer in something silly, but even now with thousands of items in the game, there's really only a handful of cosmetics I would say actually interact well with the original spooky intention of Pyro's character. So to me at least, it feels more so like whoever made these first hats for TF2 just didn't really get Pyro's character or the horror villain swag that he had, and in the absence of any other ideas, he just decided to treat him as a blank slate for a vapid joke. And things got even sillier when the community got their hands on the Pyro and started making all kinds of theories about who he really is. The most obvious thing people latched onto was the purse, which they took to mean Pyro is a female. This of course led to a torrential downpour of booby femme Pyro fuck porn, which I made a whole video about already. It's still a phenomenon worth commenting on though, that weird fascination the internet has with turning horror characters into sex icons for some reason.
She is such a bad bitch though. I will fuck the shit out of that robot, man.
Another funny thing, the guy who made the original Fempyro, Fanciest of Pants, is apparently married and a school teacher now, and left a comment under one of my videos saying he wrote his honors thesis about the production and reception of the mod. I think he also at one point said he made the character so voluptuous as a way to adjust the smaller frame player model into the default hitbox sizes, but for some reason I doubt that was his only motivation. The creator of the Fem Scout also made a scrapped female Pyro design too, with this weird Little Red Riding Hood look. But as you can see, neither design really does the character justice. And that's because there really aren't any vintage horror movies with female slasher villains. That's not really an archetype that exists to my knowledge. Valve regardless embraced this gender-bending idea from the community. We started seeing jokes about Pyro being female in official Valve products. Feminine animation variants for the Pyro were added to the game. There's even a grand reveal retcon in the comics that the TFC Pyro is supposedly actually a woman.
Medic!
Sure doesn't sound like one to me. And then came the boiling point, the upset in Pyro's history that perhaps pisses people off the most even to this day. Meet the Pyro had become the final Meet the Team short that the TF2 SFM crew had put off making. And it's not hard to imagine why. It's quite the daunting challenge to make an animated short about a character who has no voice or face and keep it interesting in the way the other shorts were. But despite how critical I am of Pyro's treatment post-launch and the Pandora's box that was Pyroland, I actually really like Meet the Pyro. I have a lot of nostalgia for the short itself and its iconic music choice. I think the joke of the short is also pretty good, if a bit misunderstood, and I appreciate that the aspect of Pyro as a slasher villain is not lost in the animation. In fact, we arguably see Pyro's most cruel depiction yet, locking characters in barns and setting them ablaze to watch them helplessly burn to a crisp. I even personally prefer it to the Meet the Medic short, although nobody I talk to about this ever seems to agree with me. The thing is though, the gag of Meet the Pyro really works best in the abstract and divorced from the rest of his depictions. If you read it as Pyro is a psychopath who enjoys killing so much that to him it feels like prancing through a rainbow field and picking candy, it's a novel and fun way to subvert a short that would otherwise probably be really boring or off-puttingly gruesome for such a charming and lighthearted game. But when you start reading the short super literally, that this is what Pyro actually sees and he's actually totally innocent and a child at heart, and you make that child personality a core tenet of his character going forward, the joke quickly falls off a cliff, at least in my opinion. The injection of Pyrovision maps, weapons, and cosmetics into the real game only made Pyro's identity even less clear to the average player. 99% of Pyro loadouts you see in the wild look like this, and a bunch of his items take him to Bubblegum Land where he dances with lollipops. How are onlookers supposed to tell from a glance that this was a Michael Myers archetype anymore? And although I do really enjoy the comics as their own thing, they are where Pyro's original character officially kinda died to me. The cutesy gag of Pyro seeing bubbles and fairies became something that, through the writing and visuals, followed his character everywhere he went. The setup that made the joke funny in the first place, that Pyro is a scary, enigmatic motherfucker, was completely forgotten, and now we're only left with the awkward, shallow conclusion you get from taking the punchline too literally. Pyro is now just a cutesy pet who knows not what he does and loves his dear friends. It feels like a betrayal of not only Pyro's original identity, but the identity of the team as killer mercenaries in general. Now, if you still don't see the point I'm making here, check out this class portrait of the Pyro by his original designer, featuring this blank, dead-eyed stare and creepy, shadowy lighting that's not present in any of the other mercenaries' portraits. And now compare that to the last shot we will canonically ever see of the Pyro from the final comic, where the newer artists literally present him as a dog at a wholesome holiday dinner table begging for table scraps. If you want to know why people like me have gripes about how the Pyro has been treated, this contrast is why. But at least they didn't show his face, I guess. So there you have it, my personal issues with the Pyro, a topic I don't think anyone else has really gone into much depth on. He was a character obviously created to be a horror slasher, killer, villain fucker, but he was instead turned into an anime jerk-off, gooner, furry mascot by the community, and then flanderized into a plushy, cutesy pet mascot child by Valve. Pyro is probably the character that best demonstrates the harsh difference between the ideals and vision the original TF2 art team had, and the direction later hires at Valve took the game. And by the way, I'm not here to tell you how to enjoy TF2 or that you need to feel any one particular way about this or that. A good amount of this is just my feelings. Maybe you think the Pyro's spooky vibe is not much of a character at all, and you think it's good they tried to expand upon it and make him less boring. I would disagree, because I think the TF2 mercenaries were obviously meant to be abstract archetypes, and that writing them into characters with arcs is a bit of a fool's errand in the first place. But regardless, I am not the TF2 fun police, and I can't change 17 years of different depictions and fan headcanons. It's just that I feel like I'm going crazy sometimes when people say the Pyro was always the way he is now, because to me that is demonstrably not true. I really wonder how things would have turned out if those spooky markings on the Pyro's mask had never been lost. Or Or if we would have gotten that cool welding mask instead of the beanie for Pyro's first hat. Maybe then his character would have gotten the reverence, love, and respect it deserved. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video or at least learned something, and I hope it encourages people to think more critically about TF2 and how dramatically it's changed, even in its early years and even before its release. If you look further into this game's history, you'll find countless other examples of characters and ideas being subverted in ways the original team didn't intend. And it's quite the rabbit hole. It sucked up years and years of my life, to be honest. I don't think I'll ever escape Team Fortress 2. Anyways, if you want to play a classic version of TF2 that has the original tone of the game in mind, if you want to go relive the golden age of 2009 to 2010 TF2 with all the art style violating stuff missing and the original atmosphere intact, I highly recommend you go check out TF2 Gold Rush. It's a mod worth keeping an eye on. Peace!